Hey everyone, welcome to week 4. We're going to be working on your first actual writing story this week. Before we get into all that though, we're going to backtrack just a little bit. I know this actually feels like 2 weeks ago, but we're going to go over your exercise 1 assignment a little bit more in depth. I have to wait an additional week because, of course, it takes me a full week to grade everybody's assignment, so then I can see the weak spots in the class and address those. Of course, that makes it really 2 weeks later when I address it, so I know it feels like we're taking a big step back, but that's why I gotta wait a couple weeks to do these, is I gotta make sure I grade everybody's and then I can see maybe themes in the class, trouble areas, and address it as a class as a whole. Just to give you a heads up before we get into that, this video is gonna be a little bit longer than others. Got to review, go over what we're doing this week, and then go over your first writing assignment, which is your hard news story. So it's going to take, this video is going to take a little longer than others. What I'll do throughout the video is when I know it's like a natural transition, we're about to move into a new aspect of the class, or a new aspect of today's class really. I'll just let you guys know, so maybe you want to pause it, go do something else, and come back, because it is a lot of information to absorb in one sitting. Okay, with that said, let's get into the actual work. So we're gonna talk about your assignment from exercise 1. Again, that was the left and right-handed deaths, and the information in what order are you gonna put it in. Before I'm gonna show a couple student examples. Before I do that, I want to show another example. It's a story in the Hartford Current. Actually, it's just about a week old. But it's similar in nature, and I want to show you how they organized it, and maybe this will help. As you know, I gave you all individual feedback. Maybe this will also help reinforce some of that individual feedback that I gave you when you see it being done in an actual story that a professional wrote. So I'm going to open up this current story here. Okay. So you got your headline, though. I didn't want you to have to worry too much about that. That wasn't what this assignment was about right now. The first few paragraphs are the big one, and this is, of course, going to be very distracting, this video playing here. All right, this was what I really want you to be focusing on. Let's take a look at their first sentence, which, if you remember, and what we're going to be learning more about this week, is the lead, right? So the lead is that first sentence introducing the story. Hartford's younger residents are leading the way when it comes to starting their own businesses. Notice a few things. One sentence here gives you, just without even reading on here, kind of gives you a hook, wants to make you read more. Well, how are they leading the way? We also understand that they are leading the way, according to this article, that they're going to explain why they've come to that conclusion. So, the lead is very broad. Doesn't give you a lot of specifics. It's just kind of introducing you. And I'm not going to spend too much time right now going into it, because we're going to talk about leads, like I said, later on in this video. But one thing I want to point out is where I saw a weak spot, and of course this is not a criticism, everybody's the same way, including me when we started, but the lead was like 4 sentences long, right? Or try to get everything into the lead. The lead can be very broad, and you can see how the current did it here. 1 sentence, very broad. This now is the nut graph, and this is where a lot of you kind of mixed it up and put all this key information in that first sentence, or try to combine all this and put this in the beginning. So we got the lead here, then we go into the nut graph, which is actually, think of it as like, the story in a nutshell. Think of it, I know that's not what nut graph means, but think of that, like what is basically this story about? What is all the information? Or what is the key piece? You could theoretically read this and understand pretty much the rest of the story. A recent study by LendingTree looks at which major U.S. cities have the youngest entrepreneurs, and Hartford came in number 5. The average age for new business founders across the country is 39, this study says, but the average age in Hartford is 38.15. All right, again, 1 paragraph here, only 2 sentences. You're starting to see a theme here, very short paragraphs. And the reason, again, why I wanted to pick this article is because very similar to the exercise that you did. It's a research, right? It's a research report that they're basically reporting on. And so here they tell you who did the actual study, what the study was about. It looked at major U.S. cities who are the youngest entrepreneurs, talked about where Hartford came in. So Hartford came in number 5, and then they also gave a little bit more just so you have some context. What is the average age? 39, where's Hartford? A little bit below. Really well done, right? So within the lead and the nut graph, you have the key information in there. You know what's in the report, what's done. Now we go into what some would call the background, background paragraphs. The study looked at 50 major cities. The video is going to keep annoying me. The study looked at 50 major cities, and millennials were the most prevalent entrepreneurs in them all. Not surprising, since millennials make up the largest generation in the U.S. right now. Gen X is the second most common generation among entrepreneurs, LendingTree says. So now it gives you a little bit of background information. This is now where you have to start to categorize where you're going to be putting information. The reason why it's called background information is because even if we did not read this paragraph and we stopped and just read this paragraph, these first two, we would understand the story. We would know what we needed to know to understand the story. This gives a little bit more information. This kind of gives context. Well, how was it actually done? Why maybe is it that way? You know, how did Hartford become it? What's the forces behind Hartford becoming the top 5? You know, so this gives you a little bit more of the context, but it's not needed for the actual focus of the story, which is Hartford is leading the way with entrepreneurs. It's a top 5. So this, and then we go down. I'll go down to another line here. The online loan marketplace analyzed data from business owners who have requested funding through LendingTree and zeroed in the ages, time, and company's organization. They tell you how the study was done. You're starting to see now all this information is supplemental, not crucial to understanding what the focus of the story is, right? This is a very short article. What they're missing and what we're going to start learning this week are leads, right? So you should have a lead quote. So I think this was just kind of rough and dirty article they're just trying to get out quickly. But if this was going to be the headline, if this was going to be above the fold story, which means like on the front page, right, or the lead story on their website, they would have done more reporting. They would have probably gotten an entrepreneur to quote, and his or her quote would have shown up. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, would have shown up right around here, probably lead quote, maybe here a lead quote, and then gone into background information. So there is an organizational aspect to it all. We go all the way to the bottom here. They do have a quote here, but it's a very general quote from the study, and that's how they're ending it. So now relate this to what you guys were just doing with yours, right? Your lead sentence should be a hook. Then you talk about what did the actual study find, how many left-handers died, what's the percentage, whatever it is. Then you can maybe get into a quote. Then you get into that background information, how the study was done, who did the study, where was it presented, and then the end is usually an interesting quote. So you can see there's a structure that you could follow. I know I posted these on Blackboard, but let's take a look at some of the ones I posted on Blackboard. I'm going to go over here to announcements. These were the ones that were actually done at the time by the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times. Let's see. All right, let's take a look at their lead. Left-handed people tend to live significantly shorter lives than right-handers, perhaps because they face more perils in the world dominated by right-handed, according to new research. Let's notice a few things they do in this lead. They don't tell you any numbers, so they're not giving you data yet. They're not telling you names, and this was a common mistake that I saw in many of them. And again, not a criticism. You guys are just learning this, and we're about to really learn leads, but just so you understand when we're talking about where information should be appearing. That the lead had, the professor who did the research. Maybe they had some of you even put California State University. Some of you put, I'm trying to think of some of the other information. I think just the percentage, the numbers of dead, of people that died, by what ages. Too much information for that lead. You don't want to bog the reader down with too much information. That goes all in the nut graph, right? And you see here that the Times does it here in the third paragraph, but that all goes just below. In the beginning, it's just a hook. It's just a summary, pretty much, of what we're about to read. And you can all do it in a little different, interesting way. You'll see the Los Angeles Times does it in a different way. So while there is a structure, you have a little bit of creativity. But again, no main details in here. You're just understanding what the story is about. Earlier studies also suggested that left-handed people do not seem to live as long as right-handed people. So they kept the lead to one sentence. Then they kind of added this additional sentence. I think they could have probably found a way to combine these two. Who might critique the New York Times, of course. But for what we're learning in this class, you could have maybe combined these. You could have maybe saved this for a little bit down the line. But again, I'm just getting nitpicky here. You have a lead, and then this is what I really care about. Now they go into the nut graph. In a letter in the current issue of the New England Journal of Medicine, researchers who study the death of 1,000 Southern Californians report that right-handers, on average, live to be 75 years old. Left-handers typically die at age 66. Bam! We understand the story in this one paragraph. Really well-written paragraph, right? We understand where did the research get reported in the New England Journal. What did they do? They studied 1,000 Southern Californians. Where? So we understand Southern California was where it was studied. What happened? They found out that left-handers typically live less than right-handers, and they even tell the ages, right? Gives you a lot of information. Then we start going into background information. The trend was seen in both men and women. They lived 10 years ago, a little bit more. Notice where they start to put the researchers' names in. Then they give you the researchers and how it was conducted. Right? Look, we're already 4 paragraphs down because that's not crucial to the story. What's crucial to the story is what did the study found. After that, then we can learn a little bit about who did the study, where where was it maybe done, what other interesting information did they find. That all comes then after. Let's take another look because I do kind of want to get this moving here. Let's take another look here. Los Angeles Times, just so you can see the difference. So remember the last lead from the New York Times. Let's look at their lead. Left-handers tend to die on average about 9 years earlier than right-handers, according to a surprising and controversial new study published today by California and Canadian researchers. So they took a little bit different of a spin on this lead, but notice they keep with the general practices. They tell us this one's a little different because they tell us where the researchers are from, California and Canadian researchers. They tell us that they add the controversial aspect. They talk about the specifics, so they do say 9 years, but they don't bog you down with all the details, right? Like ages and all that. And they just basically tell you again what the times did, that left-handers typically die earlier. So a little different of a spin, but you can see not too many specific details in here. Still very broad. Then they go into their nut graph. This was more along the lines how I was, how we're trying to learn in this class compared to what the New York Times did. But here's the lead. Here comes the nut graph. Let's take a look at how they did their nut graph. In analyzing data on nearly 1,000 deaths in San Bernardino and Riverside counties over a period of several months, 2 psychologists found that male and female left-handers were much more likely to die as a result of industrial and vehicular accidents and somewhat more likely to die from other causes. So this nut graph, different from the Times, but again, the key information is in there. 1,000, they studied how many people they studied, who the psychologists were, what did they find, right? Then they go into the background information, and then so on. I won't continue. You guys can, again, of course, read this, but you can see how they organize the information. I actually like the Los Angeles Times here lead. New York Times is nut graph. I think if you combine those two, that's the way that I think I would have written the story. Though again, who am I to criticize the Los Angeles Times and New York Times? My point is everybody does it differently. Everybody can do it differently, but you're still following the same principles, right? You're still following the same principles. Okay, so I'm going to X out of here. Last thing I'm going to do, and then we're going to move on, is I just want to show a couple of ways some of your classmates did it. This is from AO, so really nice job here. A study was conducted by comparing the death of accident rates of left-handed and right-handed people in order to determine why fewer left-handed people are among the elderly population. Look, did it different than the other ones, but it's still the key information. You understand what we're about to read. He doesn't bog you down with too much details. That's a great start. Then we go into the nut graph. Right-handed people live longer than left-handed people, according to the study posted by the New England Journal of Medicine, where it starts giving us information. Where did this come from? It talks about the person conducting it, Diane Halpern, psychology professor at California State University, blah, blah, blah. Then they talk about how they actually did the research, 987 people, death certificates that they looked into, gets into a lead quote, then starts to go into some background information. All right, nice job. Let's take a look at the last one here. Maria, how did she do it? Death and accident rates for left-handed people are significantly worse than those of right-handed people, according to a recent study published in the New England Journal of Medicine. So if she does that, that's a solid lead right there, really good lead. I'd maybe keep out the New England Journal of Medicine, but again, everybody's going to do it a little differently, and this is a solid summary lead. I understand what I'm about to read, and you know, it sets the stage pretty much. Researchers Diane Halpern, psychology professor of California State University of San Bernardino, and Stanley Coren from University of British Columbia found that left-handed people die on average 9 years earlier than right-handed people. From here, I understand the rest of the story. That's the nut graph. That's it in a nutshell, right? Then she goes on to give a little bit more information about, you know, how much more likely were they to die. Then we start going into all the background information. Different way of doing it, but again, the placement of the information is very strategic. All right, I'm going to move on here from this. I'll just say the last thing before I do that is I gave you all individual feedback too, very specific individual feedback to your actual exercise. If you're still not sure about something, message me and I can clear that up for you. But the reason why we do those exercises is because this is all leading us into your writing assignments, which will be starting this week. These are exercises, it's practice. This practice was for you to understand story structure, to start to understand where key information is supposed to go and that there's a rhythm to it. So if you're still not sure about that, let me know, because then you're going to make those mistakes on the bigger assignments that are worth more. That's why we're spending so much time doing it. All right, if you want to pause the video now, this is a good natural spot because we're about to actually go into this week's content. So go ahead and pause it. All right, so you either hung with me or you just came back. I hope you had a good break. If you did, let's go into our actual content. Okay, so this week you'll be reading chapters 7 and 8. You do not need to read pages 125 through 134 in chapter 7. You can, it's all good information, but none of this is going to be on the quiz, and it's not stuff that I'm really expecting you to know for our writing assignments. So completely optional there, but 7 and 8, that's what the quiz will be on. Of course, take the quiz right there. You guys are starting to get the flow of that now. We're going to read an example of a hard news story. I'm about to break into that in a minute, and I'd like you to also read it on your own after I go over it in this video, so you can start to refresh yourself before you write your hard news story. And then you're going to begin your hard news story, which we'll go into homework and talk about in a minute. Okay, so let's talk about what a hard news story is. I know that was in your chapter in your book, but just give you just my take on it, or at least the way that we're kind of looking at it in this class. A hard news story is something you're reporting on that you have really one chance to cover. It's in the moment. So I will give you another. I think I did this last week. Now I'm talking out loud, but I'll do it again. I'll give you an example. Hard news story being, let's talk about the Super Bowl that already passed, right? You watch the game and you report on what actually happened in the game. Patrick Mahomes throws this many touchdowns. The defense did this. San Francisco turned the ball over this many times, right? You're reporting on what actually happened. At least in the context of this class and in a very broad sense, that's hard news. You're just reporting on what's happening in the moment. You only got one chance to really cover that. Another better example, one that we see in the news, is an ambulance, a fire, right? There's a fire, some house, burns. You go and report. How did the fire start? Why did it start? Just like in your exercise that you guys are doing, right? Was anyone injured? Was there any loss of property? You're going there and you're just getting the facts right there, and you're reporting on. You're like an eyewitness to it. The feature stories and other feature stories are like profiles. So you maybe, let's say, God forbid, someone's house does burn down. The reporter then, profiles that person after. How are they adjusting? Are they getting help? How's it changed their life? That isn't so much in the moment. That's more, you have some time to develop and understand this person or situation if you're doing it on like a situation, right? So that's the distinction. And that's what you guys need to know to be able to start to write your hard news story of what the difference is between a hard news story and a feature story. Soft news, they call it, right? So let's take a look at an example of a hard news story. This is from a couple years ago. but I also want to use this example because I like the story structure that they used. So we have the headline here: 4 rescued in a Thai cave and risky operation, 9 remain inside. So it gives you just the very broad overview of the story. Let's take a look at their lead. Expert divers Sunday rescued 4 of the 12 boys from a flooded cave in northern Thailand where they were trapped with their soccer coach for more than 2 weeks as a dangerous and complicated operation unfolded amid heavy rain and the threat of rising water underground. Very long lead, but you can see again, they still, even being a long lead, it's one sentence. They give you some some specific information that they rescued 4 of the 12 boys. Maybe you could have said rescued several and then get into that information later. But you understand, I mean, it is a good lead. It covers a lot of who, what, when, where, why. You do not need to cover all that always in your lead, but they cover a lot of that in the lead, right? And you understand where this story is going. Now we go into the nut graph, and that's where now they're going to start giving you details, right? 8 boys and the coach remained inside the Tham Luang Nang Nan cave as authorized paused the international effort to replenish air tanks along the treacherous exit route. Extracting everyone could take up to 4 days, but the initial success raised hopes that it could be done. Again, this is the nut graph. In these 2 paragraphs, we understand what were, the key information, the key of the story, what is the situation. Then we get into a lead quote. The operation went much better than expected. They talk about someone who's a part of it, and then we start going into the background information. But so you can see again, of course, the structure of this, and it becomes a hard news story because think about it, they're having one chance to report on this. This reporter showing up, you can see here the image here. They're all gathered around this cave. This reporter has a deadline probably. Hey, you get the story, we need it done in 5 hours, 3 hours, whatever it is. It's now they're reporting on what do they know currently. Because again, think about it, in 15 hours, this story is going to be completely different. Now if they came back, a different reporter comes back, maybe someone's been rescued, maybe there's been a snafu and something has gone wrong, right? So the facts are changing. They're having to just report in the moment what they're witnessing, eyewitnesses to it. So this really makes it a hard news story. And you can see here how this hard news story is done. They get you a direct lead, they give you what's going on right now in the situation, comes the nut graph, and then background information. Also, if you want to, when you read this hard news story later on too, after you've gone through this video and you're starting to process these lessons, page 34 in your book, which is a chapter you've already read. I'm looking up here, there's a little, let's see if I can show it up here again. There we go. The inverted pyramid, which you guys read about and know. But you can follow along how this hard news story follows along with this inverted pyramid, which is part of the story structure. You have a lead, you have your nut graph, you have your lead quote, right? That's your first quote here, background information, and then they close it. Let's see how they close it. To the parents of all kids right now, the kids are all fine. The crew is taking good care. I promise I will take care of the kids as best as possible. I want to thank you for all your support, and I want to apologize to the parents, he wrote, who I'm not sure who they're referencing now, but somebody who's obviously taking care of these kids. So they cap it off with a nice, a nice quote to end you and understand, where kind of wrap up the story. So this is a hard news story. This is a good example of a story structure. One of the chapters you're going to be reading, which is story structure, showing you how they've structured it. It's starting to put all the lessons that we've been learning together now. Take a look at this later. Read it with that frame of reference, and read it also thinking about the story structure that you did, and see how now stories are organized. All right, good. Another chance for a small break if you want, because we're about to break into your hard news story. All right, so let's do it. Hard news story. So this is your first big writing assignment worth 100 points. You can see, your quizzes are worth 50, right? The exercise is 25. This is double your quiz, 4 times what your exercises are. So a lot of time is going to be invested into this. You will have a couple weeks to do it. It's due Sunday the 23rd. So by the end of the day, of course. So you have a couple weeks to do this. I'm going to go over what's required of the assignment, and then we can talk a little bit more about after I get through with that, some examples, and we'll go into, well, let's just go. I'm stalling here because I'm trying to think of how much I want to give you right now, but we'll go into the examples afterwards and talk about that. So let's start right here. You will write a hard news story. You must cover a live event that you attended in person. I have that bolded because it has to be something that you are actually at and witnessing. I will give an example, even though you guys have missed it now, but when I've done this in other classes, again, thinking with the Super Bowl, our Super Bowl theme. I had a student once who did the hard news story like I talked about, the Super Bowl, but she did it from her living room watching the game and then reported on it. And I said, that's not, yes, it is the example I gave you, but this assignment isn't meant for you to be sitting somewhere doing it. You have to be going out and you have to be getting quotes from somebody. You have to be actually out there witnessing it, going around and investigating the scene yourself. If you're at the Super Bowl, sure, you could definitely do that. And that's why I have attend the event live. But this cannot be something like I watched the Oscars and then reported on what I saw on the Oscars. Unless you're at the Oscars, it doesn't count for this class. You actually got to be showing up, doing the reporting, there. So show up to some live event. We're going to talk about examples down here of what that could mean. But you got to be somewhere reporting on something. Your story should be in a Word document or similar program. Do not write the story in Blackboard. So basically, just do it in, like you guys, most of you, I'm trying to think of the exercise, everyone's been doing it on Word or something like that. Just don't write it directly into Blackboard, but do it on another document first, and then just attach it into Blackboard. Okay. Your story must not use reporting from other stories or direct language from other stories. So let's say you are covering some event that's going on, a town meeting, right? What you can't do is then the Hartford Courant or some other your local newspaper reports on it, and you take a quote that they took from someone, even if you attribute it to, hey, the Hartford Courant, I got this quote from the Hartford Courant, but you can't take something from outside the other reporting, or you can't take information that was reported on from another story and put it in yours. All right, this is all original reporting to you. All the quotes that you get, which we'll talk about in a minute, all the quotes that you get are ones that you recorded, that you went out and got. You didn't copy and paste it from anywhere else. So completely your reporting here. You have to have at least one human source and 2 direct quotes that you obtain. The quotes must be recorded by you and original to your reporting. So what I was just talking about, you need to actually interview one person at the event, right? So let's say it's a town, let's say a speaker's coming to your library. So you're going to do a story on what the speaker said at your library, how many people attended to this event, all that, right? The one human source is maybe you go and actually talk to the speaker that came. Maybe you talk to someone that came to the event. Talk about how they feel about the speaker. Maybe you talk about the event to the librarian, the organizer of the event, right? So you're getting somebody there and you're interviewing them. Of course, lean on your chapter about interviewing to prepare you for that. But you're going to be talking to somebody there at the actual event. And within your story, you have to have at least 2 direct quotes that you got from them, meaning that you recorded it. You either wrote it down, you voice recorded, whatever, but you got it, right? And then you can pull from it, and it's your original reporting. Between 500 and 650 words. It cannot be below, it cannot be above. And it's going to knock you out of the A range automatically. Many publications are very strict with their word count for several reasons. So they are going to stick with it. And if you turn in a story that's 350 words, you're going to say it's not enough information, go get us more, and they're going to be annoyed. If you go past 650 words, they might have to say cut it out, or they might have to cut stuff out, and it's gonna it's gonna maybe negatively impact your story because you're cutting out information that you don't want them cutting out when you could have said it in a different way. So between 500 and 650 words, you got to stay in that range. Have short paragraphs, 1 to 3 sentences, 4 at the most. This is a little bit of an art. Your book talks about how to do that a little bit. I'm going to give you some feedback on this assignment. I know this first assignment, it's going to be rough around the edges for many of you, and that's okay. But I want you, at least at the very beginning here, just focus on 1 to 3 sentences is the sweet zone that you're sticking in. Maybe you go to 4, but if you start going past that, find a way to break it up. All right. And so that's going to be on you, just to go through your story, look at your paragraphs. Anytime you have 5, 6 sentences, know that that's too much, break it up. And then when later on do some when I later on give you feedback, I can explain to you maybe where something should have been broken up, or a better way to do that. Has to be written in the third person and in past tense, and just like your book is covered. So these are the bare minimum basics. Like, this is what you need to do. Now let's talk about what I'm actually grading on, as far as what makes something an A, B, C. Right? Is it informative and well researched? So do you give enough information in there? Do you give good background and context? Do you have, are there any unanswered questions that you were able to get and you couldn't, right? You're not always going to be able to get everything, but is there something very basic? For example, I'm just going to give you one that's egregious, but if you go to some event and then you don't even say where the location is, right? That's not very informative or well researched. If you mention somebody, so-and-so was speaking at the library, but then you never go into their background at all, who they are, so I understand a little bit more context of who that person is, well, that's not very well researched. So is it covering enough where you tell the story and you're not really leaving a lot of unanswered questions that could have been easily answered? Its organization, your story's organization, the story structure, what we've just been talking about in this video, in that exercise that you did, page 34 again with the inverted pyramid, with your chapter this week that you're going to be learning about, story structure, all this, right, is what I'm looking for. I'm not expecting you to get every single lesson, perfectly polished, but there should be the main structure we've been talking about. A broad lead, your nut graph, that key information there, right there in that second, third paragraph. A lead quote is up high in the story. You have background information that follows in the middle of the story, and then a nice close, the different ways you can do an ending of a story. That's the organization, the model that you should be following. Is the focus clear? Again, the theme of the story, right? The main point of the story. Do I understand that within the first 3 paragraphs? Really within the first 2. First 2 is where you guys should be shooting more. 3 is, if you know the rules, you can sometimes break them. But within the first 2 paragraphs, do I understand what the main story is, what the main theme is of this story? The writing is clear, concise, and informative, right? It's obviously been been through a few drafts. So it's very polished now, very concise. The quality of quotes, the information you got from the interview. All right, I'm going to do this one, quickly, and because the book talks about it as well. But your quotes are the spice of the story. You got your main reporting, and the quotes are what gives it a little bit of life. So when I say quality of the quotes, if you are reporting, I'm just going to keep using my example of someone that comes and talks to at the library, and the quote that you take is from I'm going to say Jane Smith. Jane Smith came to the library, blah, blah, blah. And then you do a quote for Jane Smith. I live in Meriden, Connecticut, and it's been a really good drive up here, said Jane Smith. Well, yes, you did tell me that Jane Smith is from Meriden, but you wasted a very valuable quote on that, because that doesn't, you could have just written that. You could have said Jane Smith, who is from Meriden, Connecticut, came to speak at the library. That's this broad general information. The quote is, again, supposed to be the spice that gives it some life. Maybe the quote you use something of Jane Smith, if she's talking about, the Civil War. Jane Smith says, a passion of mine has always been the Civil War, because it was such a divisive time, and we can learn so much from those moments in history. That's a much more interesting, powerful quote. Use that as your quote to understand who this Jane Smith is, not her saying, I'm from Meriden, Connecticut. So when I say, or whatever I said, when I say quality of the sources, quality of the quotes, I'm saying, did you actually pick, good, unique, interesting quotes that help bring the story to life? Or did you say, Professor Chiara needs 2 quotes. What are the first 2 things I have in my recordings? Bam, there it is. And then a part of that too is the information you got from your interview. So in this case, it's that was you taking, if you're actually interviewing Jane Smith, right, it's the kind of questions you did, that usually gives you better quotes, but can I tell that you got enough information to complete this story, right? You need to actually have enough information to fill in the story. So I'm looking for the kind of quotes you got, and then from that I can tell, did you get enough from your interview to be able to use good quality quotes. It's newsworthiness. This, I do have this one in here because it's part of the checklist. But if it's hard news, if it's a live event, if it's something that's going on, it's going to be probably newsworthy. I do include this because it can't be. I'll give you some. I hate to always use the bad examples for students, but it is the ones that illustrate it the best. I had once a student do hard news story, and I don't remember whatever the game was they're playing, with Fortnite or something, but some video game like that. He and a bunch of his friends got together and played. So then he like reported on Fortnite. Their like little competition. The 5 of them had that night in someone's basement. And while he did follow some of this other stuff with hard news story, right? I mean, he was right. One chance to report it. You know, they did that competition that night with the 5 of them, and he did all this other stuff. He got quotes and all that. It wasn't really newsworthy. Nobody cares about his competition with the 5 of them in the basement, right? Besides him and his 5 friends, nobody else cares. So it doesn't make it newsworthy. So I say that because if you're going to some actual event or something, it's going to be newsworthy. Don't do, I went with my friends to the movies and here's why, and then I reported on it. That's not newsworthy. That doesn't follow along with what we're doing for this class. AP style. Do not worry about this week. We're going to cover AP style next week. So you can still do a lot of this other stuff from this week. Go get your reporting, maybe even start your story. AP style is, I don't see it. It's too much for information for this video. Just don't worry about this yet. Next week we'll go over an AP style, and it's really just more of an editing, how you edit your story, and you'll be able to do that next week. How well the lessons from the chapters are being applied. Of course, the lead, nut graph, information gathered, the interview sources. This is just my catch-all. Do I see you applying what we've been learning here? I know most of this stuff is that, but just I'm looking for, are you following some of those key lessons we've been learning? And of course, last, is it free from spelling or grammatical errors? Did you really edit for that? That is the big assignment. You've got 2 weeks to do it. I'm going to give you some examples here in a minute, but one way you could structure this is this week, go out and go report on something. Go out, do the interview, cover the story, get all your notes gathered. Then you could even start maybe writing it this week, at least the lead, nut graph, start maybe structuring it. Next week, you can finalize it, write the whole thing, edit it for AP style, which we'll learn a little, start learning next week. So that's a good way to break it up. I wouldn't save this all for 1 week. It's a lot to do in 1 week. That's why that's where you get 2 weeks to do this. First week is really meant, I think, for reporting and starting your story, getting the skeleton in place. The second week is for finalizing it and editing it. Of course, though, you have your time management, so you're able to do how you want. But just know that this is usually like a 2-week type project if you really want to do well. All right, some examples. I want you to message me the event that you're going to cover in advance. So send me a message here. I'm getting lonely, right? So send me a message over here. Just give me a heads up. Hey, Professor Chair, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? Most likely going to give you the green light, or I'll give you the green light and just say, well, just consider this challenge that might happen if you do this event, or obstacle that could come. But I want you to let me know what you're planning on doing, because in this way I can just make sure we're all on the same page and you don't go to the event or you don't do something like that basement story, and then it won't work for you. You won't be able to get a good grade because it really wasn't a hard news story or wasn't newsworthy. You can also message me if you have no idea what to do and you're really lost. We can try to brainstorm ideas together. But let me give you some examples that maybe you haven't thought of before that I'm going to consider under hard news right now for the context of this class. A concert, right? And so when we say concert, it doesn't have to be a concert at Mohegan Sun too. It could be your nephews or nieces, school concert that they have. Well, I'll let you do it on that. You're going to that concert anyways to support them. Talk about what songs they're playing, how many kids are there, maybe who's running the concert. Interview someone from the crowd, hopefully not a family member, but somebody else. Just interview them about it. I'm trying to think of anything else you could do. How many people attended, right? Those are the kinds of information. That's a hard news story. You got one chance to cover this concert. Or hey, if you are going to Mohegan Sun to see someone play, go ahead and do it there too, right? But it doesn't have to be a huge scale thing. Just something that you have one chance to cover. Sports game. Very similar to the concert. Does not have to be that you're going to see, the Knicks play. It can be that you're going to your kids or your niece's, game. I was going to say soccer, but they're not playing soccer, but basketball game, right? So, cover the actual what happened in that during that actual game. Get the hard facts, the hard stats of it. A town meeting. Towns hold meetings all the time. Some of them are, I think, kind of exciting. Most people think boring, but you have ones on planning and zoning. You have town council meetings. You have special meeting coming on about, I don't know, some building that they're going to build. Whatever it is, take a look at your town website. See if there's a town meeting going on. Even if you think on the surface it looks boring, you're actually surprised. You learn a lot from having to go to these. So go to these town meeting, cover what was said and done in the town meeting. A town event. Towns often hold events on the weekends. Different charity things, different, trying to think, it's winter now, it's not as prevalent, but a parade, whatever. Take a look at your town. What are they holding this weekend? A public speech. People come and give speeches at the senior center, at the library, which I have next, right? Maybe at Middlesex Community College, if you're pretty close to actual Middlesex. Middlesex has people come in and speak. Look for just someone giving a speech somewhere. Report on the speech, what was said, how many people were there, why was it important, those kinds of things. Library event, very similar. A charity event, take a look at nonprofits in the area. They often are holding charity events. You can go to the charity event. Often, even if they're if it costs to get in there, if you tell them that you're a student writing a story, they'll let you come in and just report on the event. School board meeting, your high school, middle school, and very similar to town, just it's a school board meeting. These are just some examples I'm throwing out. Think along these lines. Things that are in the moment that you can go to, you got one chance to really cover. Message me what you're thinking about, but if you really get stuck and you have no idea, you can also say, hey, I have no idea what to cover here, and we can maybe try to brainstorm more ideas if you've already exhausted all these, you looked all these up and there's nothing there. All right, that is your hard news story 2. Told you a lot of information in this video, but now we're starting to get into the meat of the work. So quick wrap up, because I do want to wrap this video up too for me. Let's see. Let's go back here. Read chapter 7 and 8. 7 goes into your how to write leads, gets very specific with the leads. We've been just kind of around the edges, talking around the edges of how to write a lead. This gives you all the specifics on how to write a lead. They spend a whole chapter on it because it's that important. So really make sure you understand how to write a good lead, and that's what's going to be executed, of course, in your hard news story. And story structure, which we've been talking about in other chapters and a lot today, but this will go into a little bit more depth with story structure. You've got your quiz. Read your example of the hard news story, which was the Thai cave one. Take a look at page 34 as you read it, so you kind of understand how they're structuring it, and then see the elements of what makes it a hard news story. And then begin your hard news story. Go out, find something to report on. Report if you can this week. Start your story maybe. Get the story structure in there, right? The more you do this week, this will offset some of the work that you do next week, because of course next week you still will have quiz and an exercise and all that. So you don't want to overload you for 1 week. Any questions, you can message me, but I know you will be messaging me anyways to let me know what your hard news story is. All right, a lot of information. Thanks for sticking with it this week. Take a look at the feedback that I give you for your exercise. I will be doing that too. So give you the feedback on the exercise you just did. And then, of course, you can always review your first exercise too, because now that I've gone over it, you can go back and maybe look at it through a different lens. All right, thanks everyone. See you next week.